Is it moral to fund or support one side or another of a war? What does it come to at the end of that road if you continue supplying either just one side or both sides? Does it get you into a war? Well, I think we're going to be finding out soon, and all the ramifications of being involved with tentacles all over the world and what that means for the US, for the rest of our Western allies, and really everybody's involved in these conflicts nowadays. So, without any further ado, let's get right into the show today and let's talk about, well, everything that's on the table. Here we go. Andrew, my man.
What's up?
It's
What's
good to have you
up?
back on the show.
Here we
How
are.
the hell
Great to
are
be
you?
back. Pretty good. Really good.
So, one of the more recent, well performing shows after Damon and having him on talking about Ukraine was talking strictly about Israel Palestine. And we're not going to do that today. We're going to talk about kind of a broader scope and I would say more of what America has interest in. But I want to involve you on this because you're as much of a history buff, if not more than me, and understanding the repetition of history, although it never comes in the exact same shade of color, it's always got hints, right? It's always got those tones. And I think we're watching a repeat of history right now as we speak. That's kind of what I want to talk about it, frame it in that way. Um, if you don't know what I'm talking about, we're talking about two world wars in the past. And my first question to you, Andrew, having you on the show here, so I have a little bit of dialogue and give me some frame of reference. In your opinion, what makes a world war? Why would we call a world war?
Well, I think to start to answer that question, we should look at what defined a world war in the past, right? So we have two of those to base our
100%.
definition off of. Um, in the past, it was a mix of both supplying physical troops to a cause and kind of like a proxy, not as much of a proxy war as we're seeing now, um, particularly with World War II, but because World War II was much less of a proxy for America, it was more of a direct conflict to a point. Um, but if you look at all the Allied powers in World War One, um, there was a certain amount of support, monetary, financial backing and supplying a cause than there was in World War II. But there was also between both world wars, and you could say because history does repeat itself, uh, we've entered World War III whether or not we realize it. I think, um, just because of the fact that I think we've reached the threshold where we have so many different factions and so many different nations supply, even if they're not directly involved with supplying troops themselves, they're backing it one way or another via proxy, like I was
Mm.
saying before.
That's kind of the end goal of our conversation. I want to continue to prove that for the rest of the show here because I think that's an important point to nail on. I've been having the same thought recently is that whether, because I do think a lot of people do realize we are in World War III, if you want to
Right.
term it that way. Um, if you don't realize it, it's because you just don't really pay attention to history, I think. Because I couldn't agree with you more. There's one point I will say World War II definitely had a lot of funding, especially from the American side. Americans started to really pull themselves away from
Towards the
that
beginning, right?
depression time. Yeah, before we got attacked directly, being
Yeah,
directly
in
attacked,
1941. But
that
before
pulls
that,
you into the war like that didn't happen in World War One, and I agree with you there. We weren't
yeah,
directly attacked. It reached a threshold where if we weren't to step in, uh, the the Allies weren't 100% sure that they would win the battle. Let's put it that way.
right,
I think they still had it in the bag. I think Russia, being as though their revolution didn't fully topple them, was going to be able to finish the job someday. It just might have dragged on a lot longer. But I want to revisit that first question though. So when you're talking about a world war and why they called the First World War the World War. At first, it was just called the Great War. They never thought it was going
right.
to happen again until 20 years later. happened again. The reason, at least in my opinion, because I heard your words saying that there's different factions being created and different groups of nations starting to lobby behind. If it's not direct troops being brought in, then it's equipment, it's food, it's oil, right? Valuable resources. In my opinion, when you're talking about a world war, you're talking about different theaters of war. And I think that that happened pretty clearly in both world wars, right? Obviously, you had the European theater, but also when you think back to World War One, you think about the African theater, you think about the Asian theater, and of course, when you look back on World War Two, you think a lot about the Asian theater and the European theater, but also there being another African theater and Middle Eastern theater for that matter. I think having multiple theaters of war is important, and it's that automatically, right? Because if you're involving two nations, of course you have two sides. If you start involving four different nations in conflict around the world, so you have two different theaters, this I believe is where you start to get into almost an automatic situation of if things aren't tempered down, it's no longer a regional conflict. We're talking about sides being drawn across the world at this point.
Right.
Um, because the thing is, when you think about it, war's always been expensive. Nowadays, with technology, I think the prices have never been higher. Obviously, with inflation as well, you could say. But when you think about how much resources need to be dedicated just to fund one war and to be on the side of one war, let alone two, and many of the larger economy Western nations, including our own, are funding one side in both of these wars, not just one. They're not just picking their battles, they're actually taking a side on both. If you look at it from that standpoint, it makes me take almost a logical jump that, well, these two conflicts must be interrelated a little bit more than even we're letting on, or that we may have knowledge to. Because I find it hard to believe that two separate conflicts can be floated by the world. Because you're talking about, like I said, four sides that need to be propped up.
Yeah, I mean, of course, because uh, whether you whether we like it or not, nations trade with each other, and we trade with each other for what? To benefit each other, ultimately. So whether or not one of the recipients of
Correct.
those trade agreements are using that benefit um, for nefarious purposes or to advance their cause in whichever war is going on, um, I think that's happened all throughout history, like you said.
Absolutely. Uh, ha- does that make you also formulate an opinion, though, of that is what a world war is when you're involving this many players?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. It has to, yeah, once you're involving mul- obviously multiple parties, it's, yeah, absolutely. Multiple parties stacked um, in different theaters, like you were saying, I think is a good way to put it.
Hmm. So, moving on to one of the more important points I wanted to touch on this show and kind of get your feel for it, because I'm honestly at a kind of a fence sitting position here. Um, how do you feel about the morality question of, is it moral, is it right, is it just to fund a war that is not your own?
I don't think there's a clear cut and dry answer to that, honestly. I think the answer,
Hmm.
like to many things, is it depends, you know. Um, and then even if I look at it one way, someone else is gonna take it and skew it and look at it from a completely different lens, right? So,
Hmm. I think that's important
that,
to look at
yeah,
it that
that's a
way, though,
really
because you're
broad
looking at the
question.
interest of the nation.
Yeah,
Yep.
if you're looking at
And
it
I don't
just
want
from
to
that
point it
perspective,
at like
I
one conflict
think
either.
right, and yeah, so yeah, I don't want to get too broad or too specific. I guess not, but um, when it comes to defending your nation, you're going to be biased towards that usually. Um, and I think objectively, if we see that a nation is wrong, and you could see that objectively what happened to them, was evil or was if they have a legitimate response, right? Because violence is a legitimate answer in the face of injustice. Sometimes it can be a legitimate answer. I mean, so if you're at that point, objectively speaking, I think it can be moral. But if your response is based off of some really radical ideology that's just kind of out there, then that's where I really think it starts to get problematic.
I would agree. I would honestly take a little more hard line of a stance here on this specific question because I think that our structure as a nation and as an economy is pretty reliant on opportunity. And what wartime does is it provides an opportunity to nations like ours to kick it into high gear in order to meet demands. And we can make a lot of money here. And my point in making this whole statement is that I think that our government in general needs to take a harder look at in which scenarios we are willing to jump in economically. Because generally speaking, uh, involving yourself economically when it comes to war is closely followed by intervening with boots on the ground.
It is.
And honestly, involving ourselves, like all of this stuff where it says aid to Ukraine, aid to Israel, as much as we might want to hate on them, I think we would be lying to the audience if we didn't admit that we know that that's not really just donating money. That's a loan. That's actually economic interest for the United States, right?
Right.
I just would like to call it a bad thing when I'm talking about aid to Ukraine or aid to Israel, specifically because I think it's this point we're talking about now. You get to a point where you have the largest economy in the world, if not the largest perceived economy in the world, meddling on certain sides of conflicts and shutting others out, like we talked about on previous shows, shutting out Russia,
Right.
getting them out of our fiat world, and honestly starting a firestorm, in my opinion, and a problem that's going to be felt for a long time. Um, Keeping them away from accessing our dollar and weaponizing the dollar against them. Not that it hasn't been done before, but so blatantly. I think that it really shows the hand that we are prepared for going to war. And let's just be honest: if the U.S. gets involved in either war, the war is a world war. It has now
Right.
been determined. You're involving someone from North America in problems that are completely not based, I would say. And this is where I think the moral problem comes. This is where I think if more attention was paid by our leaders, if it was considered a little bit more deeply what the ramifications are of starting this process of making money during war. Not to say I don't think we are where we are right now, but I think we're holding a lot stronger of a hand.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Um, I think there is power in withholding our capabilities as well, especially in the long term.
Right, right. And I would say if you're chasing it to the nth degree, right, of trying to be an economy that flourishes in this opportunity zone, I think it's imperative to supply all sides and do your best to not break that. And I believe that that is what was attempted during World War One and attempted during World War Two. Now, breaking Britain's blockade and getting access to Germany and actually getting them supplies, well, that was the problem. That was why so much of our aid ended up going to Britain, right?
Right.
But regardless, the attempt of trying to make money everywhere instead of honing in on the people that you trust and creating a lopsided economy worldwide,
Right.
I think you could make a much better moral argument for the latter case of making it open to everybody rather than dialing in. It kind of seems like you're on the road to fascism, if not some sort of communism, if you're making it that kind of way.
But if you're talking about free trade too, restricting that, people might also
It should
say
go to
that
the highest
that's
bidder at all times. Yeah,
yeah, and people say restricting free trade might also be fascist or communist, um,
I would agree.
as well. So yeah, I mean,
I would agree.
and ultimately,
And
what
this
I
is
think
where the morality comes in. I like that question.
is, I think, I think what benefits countries and economies too, it can be a detriment, but a lot of the times when you're talking about competitive advantages in free trade, that can be helpful to a country and their consumer. But there's also the moral question there, right? What's economically a little better versus what's morally better, and they're not always aligned, as we know.
Right, and I think, I guess the perspective I'm coming from is if you're looking to make money, but in my opinion, if you're a good government official, you are protecting your citizens, and that's not sending them to war, not putting them in positions
Absolutely,
to get into a war, which
absolutely,
is where I think we are now. I think we're at a
yep,
position where, as citizens, we're not going to have a choice when our government decides that it's time to go to war. It's time to go to war,
right.
um, and we're nearing that point. I would say.
And you can be
Now,
conscripted
what it's going to
against your
take
will to
is
do so,
correct.
technically.
What I think it'll come to be honest, is going to be a terrorist attack or a surprise attack on the United States by someone who wants to get us into the war.
Yeah,
Think about a Pearl Harbor attack,
look at
right?
like a
Think
Pearl
about
Harbor,
sub
exactly.
Yep, think about a sub attack off the East Coast or West Coast of the United States, or submarines even just being there. Think World War II. Um, these type of acts provoke people, and this is the type of action that it's going to take, I would say, for the United States to get in. But look for that. Look for, maybe not even on the United States, but look for someone to attack Britain. Look for someone to attack a France or an Italy, just to see what would happen,
Yep,
right? Because the the best way to generate chaos and to make this blow over into something that's much larger is going to be a smaller group, possibly, maybe not even a state, but a smaller group coming together and committing an act that propels a nation into war. And I think that because of the just the tensions and the overall feeling in the world, that chance is going up.
right. And I think as America in particular is especially vulnerable too, just because it seems the last true really large scale violent attack was 9/11, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you can make
That's the
I
last
think you
time
can
we
make an
were invaded.
argument that
That's the last time we were invaded and attacked
yes.
on our homeland.
I mean, a lot of people still point to the Boston Marathon
Boston
bombing as
bombing, I
well.
was thinking that too, but you can't compare the scale between that and
You can't compare the scale, and I would
9
say in an act to provoke war, yes,
9/11. Right.
yes,
That's where I'm
yes.
coming from. Life in America has been, overall good and peaceful for most of the time. I mean, obviously, it hasn't been perfect. There's been many ups and downs. Been interesting for sure, but um, when you look at like the 20 or 30 years between both world wars, the first and second world war, um, we're
Mhm.
long overdue for something um, to a larger scale. Right now, after you had Korea, you had Vietnam, um, but then kind of after that, our conflicts kind of got a little more what seemed to be lower scale, um, less involved. Obviously, they were still serious, but they it wasn't as much of a combined effort of everybody within the United States and our allies. And we
Mhm.
certainly wouldn't call them world wars. Um,
No.
so if you want to look at it from that perspective, um, I think maybe Americans and society, or maybe just America or the world, is getting maybe a little too complacent. I hate to say it, but
We've been saying that since the beginning of our show.
yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but um, I mean, it's peace is a beautiful thing. Peace is a wonderful thing. We all want we all want peace, unless you're sick in the head. Um, so of course we're as we experience it more and more and more, we get more and more comfortable. But just to kind of be honest with myself and with the audience, it can't last forever because it's never history hasn't ever shown us that can happen. There will always be evil in the world. There will always be conflicts, and there will always be conflicts that ultimately arise that may take us by surprise. The scale of which may take us by surprise.
I agree 100%, man. When you talk about that, I actually have a follow-up question to you.
Yeah.
It's something that's said a lot in history, especially in history classes. But are you a subscriber, or do you think that the belief that war is necessary? Do you
It's funny you
believe that,
asked me
or
that.
maybe more specifically, is it necessary to keep the state functioning in a proper manner?
It's funny you say that, because that's actually it's really weird you say that because I've actually been really struggling with that question for a little while
Hmm.
now, particularly over the past couple of weeks. I've really been thinking to myself, um, right? I want the answer to be no, it's not necessary, but the the logical part of my brain also, in a way, says, like I said before, there's always going to be evil and peace in the world, and violence is a legitimate answer in the face of injustice. So if there's always evil, and there's always going to be some injustice going on. Um, and I'm not saying violence is always the answer to injustice, but it certainly can be, right? Uh, Especially
Hmm.
when
Sometimes it's necessary.
you're sometimes it's necessary. It's just as simple as that. Um, I want the answer to be no, war is not necessary, but I think at times it is. But I want to caveat that by saying, have all the wars that have ever happened or that the United States has been a part of been necessary? The answer to that is absolutely not.
Hmm.
I don't want to so war can be necessary, but I don't want to say it is necessarily all
I
the
like
time.
that statement though. I like that statement though, and I guess when you look at it from a certain perspective, as much as you want to be anti-war, right, pro-peace, if someone is going to go against not only your values as a nation, or your values as a people, or your values as a maybe it's a practicing group, but when you see a nation, right, and you think about what Hitler was doing in running concentration camps the way that they were, the Japanese doing the same to their POWs or worse, right? Think about what America did to Japanese citizens, right?
Right. We had our own internment
Brings
camps
me
here.
right, and we have our own name for them because in reality they were re-education or concentration camps, depending on whatever language you want to put it in. Right? It's
Right.
not like I'm not trying to say that we were on the level of what Hitler was doing, but it raises a question to me, especially if if America embodies what we love to call the melting pot, right? Which I don't think we are, but I think that we would love to be. And if we really want to have this mentality that our nation is for everybody and for everybody to come, I guess my first question would be, do you really think that people that come from a certain place, wherever it may be around the world, but they're not born in America, do you think they lose their loyalty to that nation when they come here?
Generally speaking, I don't think so, no. I think the answer to that has changed over the course of time too. I think if you were to ask me that question 100 years ago, I think a lot more people would say, yes, I lose my
They would
loyalty
voluntarily.
to my
They would
country. They
voluntarily
they
do it.
they come to
Right. It
America
has
and they say,
changed in
"No,
that way.
I'm American now." But now you see a lot of and it's fine. I understand wanting to preserve culture. Um that culture is something I really appreciate, but you see a lot less assimilation nowadays. You saw a lot more
I would
assimilation
agree.
100 years ago.
I would agree. Yeah, I could take a personal example from my ex. Talking, I asked her directly at some point, like, do you feel American? Or do you ever feel like you will be? And the answer to that question was no.
Wow.
Like, directly. Didn't matter if
Wow.
citizenship was attained, didn't matter. It was bare bare knuckle, not even a thought in the wind. It was no, I am Brazilian. So if you think
Wow.
Obviously that's one person, but this is a person who had their father give up a lot to come here, and to want their child to succeed in America, and to think that that person would never feel American. Very anecdotal, but I would just put that in now because I agree. The allegiance thing, like my grandfather was the first generation born here in America from a family of Italy. Some of his sisters were born in Italy before they came. When you think about that person and what he became by the end of his life, he fought in World War II. He was fully American to the day that he died. He was the most American and proud person of not only what the country was, but of what he was able to build in the country, especially when he came back from World War II. So you think about the type of person that takes to have that courage and to have that confidence in what he was as a person and what he could do for the country and be able to serve and come back. You look at that type of person that is not a rare person to find in most people's lineage that have at least three generations in America. Many of the people that we went to class with, I know there was a day, unfortunately, they're pretty much impossible now. There was a day in school when I was a kid when people would bring their grandparents in and they would tell their stories about Vietnam, about World War II, and about
Right.
just how much sacrifice went into being in service. And not only that, but how much love of country every single one of those men, who it was always men. I never had a nurse come in or anything from the war, which I would have loved to have that experience. But it was always grandfathers coming in, and it was really impactful for the boys. And when that stopped, that was elementary school. Um, it just you could, in my opinion, you easily saw the decline in patriotism with the kids and the amount of, well, especially once you got to high school, you just saw the amount of people that just disrespected America. The amount of people that wouldn't even stand up for the pledge, right? And
They'd
you're
be
talking about
sitting on their
Americans here.
phones, with their hood up, headphones in. Yeah.
You'd be talking about Americans here, not immigrants.
Yeah.
Americans just
No,
not
kids who
giving a
were
shit.
born and bred here who have been established here for generations. Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
the
I
sentiments
think that's a
change.
major
7 years
factor
ago,
as
you wouldn't
well.
have seen that. I
Yeah, I
think
think
the
that's a
big
major factor as
catalyst
well.
to that kind of attitude shift was definitely the Vietnam War.
Vietnam, and then I would say also the promulgation and the continuation of operations in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Iraq, yeah. Yeah. But I
Um,
think the biggest shift was Vietnam.
I think that was the biggest moral hit to the United States. Yeah,
Um,
and even more specifically, when you think about was it the My Lai, the My Lai rape of meal,
right.
slaughter
Yeah.
innocent. It was the war in total. It was, and obviously people got to see the Kennedy assassination right through the middle of that. I think that whole time shift greatly damaged the moral fiber of America.
I agree.
But
I
that
do.
just urges in the complacency, right? And I think something that's remarkable is e- everybody has their own free will in America still to this day. You have the ability to choose whether you want to go to school or not. You have the ability to choose whether you want to learn that day. You have the ability to choose whether you want to accept or reject bad ideology. And if you want to actually act upon that ideology, you still have that right and that privilege to this day in America. The amount of people that use that right and privilege of freedom of choice to do things that are detrimental to not only themselves, but their family and their future, and the teaching of this being a good, right? This teaching of greed, the teaching of living in the moment and that being the best way to live at all times, right? That attitude and acceptance is, in my opinion, on the individual. It's not hard, in my opinion, to reject all out just hedonism. It's not hard to reject something that is so anti-human. I don't have another way to say it. Think about an ideology that I'm going to paint with a broad brush here, but think about an ideology that is for the abortion of babies up to 9 months. And if you don't agree with that, then you're Satan. Think about someone who forces that logic on someone, or think about someone who cannot fathom that someone would want the right to defend themselves or their family with a firearm. Think about how far, and those are two broad brushes to paint, but I think it pretty well sums up two things in America that everyone has an opinion on: abortion and guns. Think about how much you must not care about another individual or about where they came from, why they might have the feelings that they have. Think about the just the amount of hatred that person must have to think that your opinion does not matter, that your opinion should not be considered. Okay?
Right.
And I think just bringing that point up alone shows how far our society has crumbled into. I don't want to say it's going to collapse or we're at a point of collapse, but we're at a point of we don't know who the fuck we are. And I'll tell you right now, we ain't figuring it out anytime soon.
Definitely a absence of identity. And I don't think that people don't long for it. I don't think that
Hmm.
society isn't longing for an identity. I think there's just, you hear this word all the time, an identity crisis. There's an absence of identity and purpose within society as a whole, within individuals. I think that explains a lot of behavior that we see today. And I think people who say, oh, society's going to collapse, society's on the brink of collapse. No, it's not. I don't believe that. Um, I don't think it's
I
going
don't
to
believe
collapse
it either.
tomorrow. Is society degrading? I do believe that it is, yes, but I don't think it's beyond repair. I don't think um
Now,
I really don't think, a couple
I
decades of
have
degradation, even if
a
you want to call
wild
it that,
thought.
um, is
Hmm.
irreversible. I really don't. It's a drop in the bucket compared to um history, even American history. And look how much society has changed within our
All right.
250 years. In another 20 years, we might be we might be an incredibly conservative nation again. Who knows?
Now, I have a thought, and I want you to follow this logic train with me. Your nation, okay, you're a set of leaders. Your nation is morally beat up. They are feeling it in the pocketbooks. They are starting to really lose faith in you as leaders. And not only that, it feels like just the fabric of your nation, whatever's tying you people together, is no longer really existing. And you put yourself in that scenario. We'll say that America was there. I'd say we reached it in the middle of Obama's reign and throughout Trump. I don't think, generally speaking, the average American felt any better in Trump. I think Trump supporters felt way better during Trump, and uh, Clinton/Biden supporters felt like death. So I think it evened out to everybody basically still felt like we weren't on a great track.
I think if you look at
Um,
independence, though, um, independence took took how great
Not my argument.
those years for were for
Not my
granted.
point though. My
Oh,
point being, on a grand scale, Americans really haven't been extremely patriotic on a broad stroke. Haven't been extremely patriotic or feeling great about the country, I would say, since the middle of Obama's term, right? And especially towards the end, if you include COVID in Trump's analysis, I would say people really felt like shit at the end there, right?
yeah, I would say
So
that goes
lump
back
this
even to
in.
like 2005 ish. Like I think 9/11 is really when we saw our last true spout of patriotism here.
Okay, right. Okay, so make that argument. And imagine you're a leader in this scenario. Wouldn't one of the best fixes to almost all of the problems, think about economic, think about think about the fabric of the nation being able to come together, think about solidifying yourself as a good leader, possibly. Wouldn't a solution to a lot of the problems we just talked about be war? If you were able to execute it
It could
effectively,
be.
I must add as a aside there if you can effectively instigate and then end a war with your might, if you could do that, wouldn't that solidify your nation significantly? Especially if you are in the stage now, like we are, where we are funding wars on multiple fronts in the world. If you
Yeah,
said
you
something,
there?
I missed it.
Yeah, you totally cut out.
If you heard anything I said, I was just saying, isn't war possibly a solution to basically everything we've talked about up to this point?
Yeah, of
Possibly
course it is.
even giving your people some sort of identity to live for.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, if you look at regardless of the cause of the war, you find that most people are most patriotic about their country during wartime. People sign up voluntarily to fight for their country because they feel passionate about, in most cases, and we could talk about how their minds get to that point, but people volunteer to sign up to fight for these beliefs and these causes that these countries believe in, or these if the government feels oppressed, right? If the country feels attacked, people who are patriotic about their country take that personally. Um, and if you look back on history, there's times where it looks like it's questionable, like, oh well, if I was there, would I have signed up? It's like, how did so many people sign up to fight for this cause or that cause? But it's because the mindset at the time was just so strong towards that one vision, so settled on that one vision of the nation that you can almost say it's like brainwashing. I hate to put it that way, but um, particularly, I guess, when you go back like 500 or like 1,000 years, even, um, it's like really like you signed up to do that, give your life for that. It's like so insignificant in the grand scheme of time, it seems. But um, I mean, there are more contemporary examples of that too. Uh,
I mean, a lot of American history has been volunteer troops, right? People signing up themselves for war, signing up their buddies, going and
right,
signing
but
up
it wouldn't
together because
necessarily
we
be,
thought
at
we could
least from
fight.
our perspective, at least from our perspective, it wouldn't necessarily be like a silly cause from what we're looking at. Like I'm talking about um like one emperor just like puts out a message saying, "Oh, we're being attacked. We want everybody to, you know, fight for the country because we're being attacked." When in reality that's not what's happening, but people are still like flooding to the place to sign up to the army in droves because, they feel like they're being attacked or something. Um I think there's a lot of mind games that go on with it too.
Mm.
That's kind of my
Oh,
take on it.
definitely. Yeah, definitely. And think about in modern terms how much better just the average citizen has gotten at understanding things, at reading, at writing. So the challenges that a modern nation needs to overcome in order to conscript people into war, to get people signed up for the army, that's what makes me so. I want to end out this conversation on the war aspect in total, and I want to finish it out with a little bit of a kind of an explanation on why I think. I mentioned earlier that I think someone is going to be provoked into war, probably by a smaller group, and maybe might not even be a nation. People. Why I might think that. So I was just because I wanted to do this show. I was looking into some of the numbers on the most recent totals from both wars that are going on in the world right now. And of course, we're not talking about a third theater in Africa again. We're talking about what's going on with Rwanda. And if anybody wants to go hear just a little bit about that stuff, and the whole situation is it's beyond my explaining, but let's just say a small nation is putting the hurt on a massive nation in the middle of Africa, and a lot of nations in sub-Saharan Africa are taking sides, and it's probably going to get nasty. That being said, you look at these, I'll say two theaters that we focused on a lot today, especially because of the financial ramifications of it. The whole reason I think an event might happen to stir the pot is that the numbers of deaths have significantly decreased in their rate on every side of the conflict. So First of all, if you just look at the Israeli-Palestine conflict, which is a continuation, like I mentioned on my solo episode a little bit ago, the numbers have stopped rising, but the war is not even being talked about as if there's a resolution. I think the last time I checked, it might have been a month ago that I was recording the show. I think there was about 32,000 deaths in Gaza, and that's
Wow.
total. Wow. Right? And that's a pretty high rate since October 7th. It's at 33,000 at the end of this month, or at the end of last month. So, being just over 33,000, the rate has declined sharply, the rate of death. There's basically no deaths on the Israeli side, or at least they're claiming none.
Yeah.
When you look at what's going on in Ukraine, allegedly over this whole span, now this is I'm going to caveat this with I kind of told Andrew before the show. I don't think anybody's truthful about these numbers when I'm talking about the Ukraine and Russia conflict, and I don't really think anyone's being truthful about the Israeli-Palestine ones either. To be completely frank with you, but when you look at what's going on in Ukraine specifically, we're talking about now. This is a war that was started, I believe, we're going on 3 years now. Believe it was 2022. So you have 2022, 2023. This is going to be, I'm sorry, the third year we're going on for the war here. And death toll is at 31,000 troops, allegedly, for the Ukrainian side, trying to say that the Russians have lost somewhere around 150,000. Now, I don't believe that number. I've seen a range ranging anywhere from 75,000 all the way up to 500,000 for the deaths on the Russian side. And I've seen Russian figures trying to say that they killed over 100,000 Ukrainians. I've seen sources that say that Ukrainians have lost less than 25,000 people. Now, when you're just looking at the grand scheme of things, the length of the war and the amount of people that Russia could be dedicating, I think you could credibly say they've lost somewhere in the ballpark of 100,000, and Ukrainians have lost, and I think this is only soldiers, the Ukrainians have lost somewhere in the ballpark of 25 to 35,000. If you're going to look at from the capability standpoint, from the amount of aid standpoint that's been coming into the Ukraine side at least, and getting funneled into this war, you would think that a lot more action would be happening, a lot of front changing. Really, stuff hasn't changed in almost over a year now. And that tells me if nobody's willing to walk to the peace table, then everyone's kind of just waiting for the next move.
Right.
And that's where I get that point of I believe that something is to be happening soon, right? The US election is too important of a global event, not just an event to us Americans. As much as we love to look high and mighty on ourselves, it is true. Our our election means a lot. It tells the world a lot about what our next 4 years of international policy is going to be based on who is elected in at the top. And
Right.
it tells them in what mode America might be in. Now, I'll be honest, with Trump coming in, possibly heading in for a pretty clear cut victory, I don't know what his next 4 years look like. I don't think they look anything like the first, to be honest with you. What that means, I don't know if that means he is a master peace negotiator and just makes this thing go away. I don't know if that means he intervenes on Israel's behalf like this once he gets in office. I don't know what that means for Trump, to be honest. And that's where I find it hard to make a decision here. But when you look at it
Yeah.
from the global stage, inflicting damage on an American asset or America itself might sway the election a certain way. And they know that. So look out for that. That's basically what I'm saying.
I think that's a very fair assessment, and I think it's a very accurate perception too, because you're lying yourself if you don't say that the American election has implications all around the world.
Yep. Comes down to trade policy, comes down to economics when you're talking about war, especially. It comes down to mm, what kind of mm, reactions you might get with new policies that are put on the global stage, right? Think about World Economic Forum stuff and the all of the environmental changes that are going on worldwide. Think about America's subscription to that based on what side of the aisle gets voted in at the top, right? These are stuff that is these are all things that other countries take into consideration. And to think that someone wouldn't want to, like, think about a Russia. Think about how much incentive they might have to get, right? If you're to take Putin at his word, which I would never suggest anybody do, but if you kind of read the body language and read between the lines a little bit of that interview that he did with Tucker Carlson, it seemed to me, at least, that Putin was kind of angling to make a peace deal, as long as it was favorable to Russia. He was willing to negotiate peace. Now, nobody's come to the table with that, so what option does he have, right?
Right.
Wouldn't it be advantageous for him if he's in that position and being honest and wants to get out of this war, wants to profit from it, obviously, for his nation, but wants to get out of this war? Wouldn't it incentivize him to do something, maybe utilizing one of those vassal states that's not 100% a part of Russia right now, but we all know is underneath almost his direct orders?
Right.
Wouldn't it be ambitious on him to maybe try to force an incident with them as the instigator, right?
Right. Not him
And
directly.
that's not just him, right? Think about the interest. I've been talking about this with a few different people. Think about the interest that China has over Taiwan, and we've been talking about this for years because it's been something
Yep.
that we're kind of just waiting for. They could flick that switch and maybe even make it appear like they are threatening an attack when they're not even thinking about it, just to get us alarm bells ring. I think that's the state that we are at, and I think that I'll go back to what you said in the beginning of this show. If you look back on the culmination of everything that we talked about today, I would say if you don't recognize that we are inside of World War III and everybody is just shuffling their cards to see which horse they're going to back, I think that you should go realistically listen to some of the other podcasts that we've done on this show. A lot of them have been just me. Some of them have been me and you, Andrew, and a lot of them have been with our guests. And a lot of our guests have been talking about, and most of them having a lot more experience on this earth than us, but trying to read the room and kind of just seeing what's the writing on the wall. And the writing on the wall is we're heading for a global, massive conflict. Now, what direction that goes, who is the good and evil, that stuff is up in the air at this point.
Right.
But the overall sentiment is there. And I very heavily suggest you go back, listen to some of our shows, and listen to a lot of shows about other people, by other people, and go read a little bit. Go find out a little bit about our history here that we've been talking about: World War One, World War Two. Think about before those times. Why wasn't it possible for a world war to really happen until the turn of the 20th century? Then we start to understand why we might be in the position that we're in right now.
Yep. Those are very interesting questions to ask, but also very important questions to ask yourself,
Mm,
especially if you're not familiar.
yeah, yeah, and like you said, go back again. If you don't realize that we are in it, go try to understand a little bit more of the background of why I might be saying this. Right? You have America. Look at the American perspective. Let's try to break it down like we're talking to a 5-year-old, Andrew. We'll finish out the show right here. You have America funding one side of the war in your Ukrainian and Russian conflict, and that would be the Ukrainians. Now, Biden quickly realized his mistake and is no longer using the dollar, quote unquote, as a weapon against Russia, but we all know that trade is restricted. We all know that trade is restricted with China, right? Causing this animosity globally is a little bit of a red flag, in my opinion. Now you look over to the Middle East and what's going on with Israel. The amount of money that we send every year to Israel is questionable at best, I would say, at this point. Then you start to go on to what actions have been performed in the current conflict. Right, if we're going to isolate what just happened, attack on October 7th and the response to that by Israel. Well, they decimated 30 times the amount of people that were killed on that attack allegedly. Right? This is all allegedly. We are continuing to fund them. We're continuing to put our money into a side of really the side of global politics that we've involved ourselves with from the beginning.
Right.
two different theaters, Middle East and Europe. And to understand that it might be a problem, think about the amount of countries that might be offended that we are aiding Israel instead of them. Now, that's not to say we're not sending other Middle Eastern places cash, because we are. We are
We
sending a lot of
certainly are.
places money and aid right now, right? And that raises another set of questions, right? I might have said earlier in the show that it was morally correct to fund all sides if you're trying to be the best capitalist state. But if you're to say that all countries are morally equal, I think you're fooling yourself once again. And to think that we as Americans, and especially our leaders, can't stop that switch, that flow of money, that we can't end that because we have our duties and yeah, they're doing terrible things, but they need the money or they won't survive. Well, listen, the whole point of us having that power is to be able to take it back. I think you even mentioned this earlier in the show. Utilizing that ability to withhold any sort of funding, let alone war funding, if
Right.
actions aren't being taken that benefit your state in some way, shape, or form, well, then I think that's one of the biggest powers that we have, and not doing that. Now, you look at the grander scheme, what I just mentioned, two theaters, both being supplied and helped out in many ways on both sides by the United States. And the amount of people that could be affected by this, people that have problems with it, you're pulling yourself into a conflict almost, not even almost. You're doing it on purpose. It is strictly for really economic considerations, it seems, but you are purposefully making yourself inside of somebody else's business. And that's why I would say that we're inside World War III.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. I
Well, now
second
I
that.
don't want to end it on that. I don't want to end it on that because there's a question that we didn't get to from our list sheet.
Oh,
And
let's do it.
I want to save this for the end. The amount of people that made it back to this, if you made it all the way through the show, I'm glad you waited.
You're a G.
Hold on, I just got a stupid text. I got to recalibrate. What, as a nation, what do you do if. I'm sorry. Fucking laugh at myself. As a nation, what do you do if you have people living inside your nation that support the other side of a war
That
you're
are the
getting
enemy.
into or are in? What do you do? And I turn again to what we mentioned about World War II. Again, if you made it all the way through the show, congratulations. I'm alluding back to the middle here. World War II, United States took Japanese Americans and German Americans and Italian Americans, put them into camps. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing?
When you cite national security, it certainly doesn't seem as much of a bad thing, no.
Right? Right? But now you expect this, right? And this is kind of where I'm talking about. This is why you try to avoid war. This is why you make better decisions in the forefront, in the beginning,
To avoid having to be in that predicament.
to avoid having to make this end game decision, to avoid having to
Right.
make this all out war decision that I think is coming up.
I agree.
Um, because I don't have a good answer to that question. Is it right or wrong to basically withhold rights, not basically straight up, withhold rights from citizens of your nation based on a national security threat that you caused as a leader, in my opinion? It's hard. That is a hard decision for me to support. Doesn't matter doesn't matter how you got there. And these are the problems that get started over me wanting to make a buck as an American, over the fact that, again, we have an opportunity in front of our faces to make some money.
Gonna have to chew on that for a little bit.
This is why I wanted to have this podcast, man, because these are the thoughts that have been going through my mind lately. Is at what point at what point are we honest about what, like you said, we're already in the middle of this. At what point are we
Right.
honest with ourselves about what's actually down the road in the next 6 to 12, maybe 18 months?
And it's
Those are
kind of
some
led me to,
decisions that whoever's at the top is going to be making.
yeah. And I mean, it's really, It's really led me to be pondering that question you asked me, like, is war really necessary? In most cases, I don't really see it.
Well, I think that's where we ended today, Andrew. I want you to let us know in the comments what do you think, specifically on that question. Do you think war is necessary? Um, it's a tough one to answer, and I think maybe not necessary, but I think being as though it will always be here, there will always be a conflict around the world. I think some of you are going to give some interesting answers. Till next week,
Yeah,
Andrew, thank you so much.
no problem.
I wish I were the
See you guys
fucking
next
Peace out,
week.
man.
fate. I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.